Hey guys, welcome back to Admix for another session of Giving the Game Away. I am joined with Ian, and today we're going to talk about Hypercasual.
Yes, we are. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Do you play a lot of Hypercasual games?
Actually, that's actually what got me into gaming,
Really?
which is really why it's such an important topic for me. Because as a teenager, I was not a gamer. I was never really playing console or PC, except like the occasional FIFA or motocross madness or whatever. But definitely not spending too much time on it. But I'm definitely the occasional gamer when I have 5 minutes in the transports mainly, or maybe waiting for something at home. It's not rare that I pull up my phone and instead of scrolling through Instagram, I pull up one of these hyper casual games. So it's and my first business in games was actually building those mini games as well. So it's a topic that is very close to my heart and my history in gaming. So I'm very excited about what we're going to uncover today.
Yeah, nice. I mean, we're going to start off just by talking about the immense success that hyper-casual games are. So you're already proof of that. It's weird that it's not a genre that appears in Play Stores or App Store, though. It's so huge, probably bigger than the genre that it does exist in arcade, but it's not getting the recognition that it's probably earned by now. It's got 5 more times traffic than the next closest genre on mobile?
Yeah, probably a matter of time. I mean, it's still a sub-genre of, casual and arcade. But yeah, it's so big now, and in terms of downloads, it's like by far the biggest category as well. So it definitely deserves its own category.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a couple of stats here. So 167 million sessions a year compared to casual as a genre is 43 million. Insane. Wow. It's responsible for almost 80% of game download growth between 2019 and 2020. Huge. It's valued at like 3 billion a year alone. It's a titan in the gaming world, and it's just sort of being scurried away under the carpet of arcade.
Yeah,
it is fascinating. But you see those the companies that are experts in hyper casual, they're doing incredibly well. Voodoo, Boombit, they're well known and they are very profitable. But people aren't really talking about it in the wider gaming conversation, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if there is definitely, I think, almost a negative stigma about it. Like a AAA studio would kind of look down on those games because obviously, as we will discuss in a bit, the gameplay is not quite premium, quote unquote. They churn out games after the other instead of really polishing the mechanics. So I feel like it's almost a different type of content altogether, and saying that it's games, it's so varied that actually it probably deserves a different name.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the conversation I see around it is that a lot of people are salty about ads in them, and that's sort of what differentiates them. And ads are always going to be a difficult subject when it comes to the free-to-play space, but they're also a necessary one. Hyper-casual games, to start with, and this is when I started on hyper-casual games, they were aggressively advertised. Like the pop-up adverts, banner ads everywhere. It was not a pleasant experience. It's getting a lot better, and it has gotten significantly better. But I think that might be that early days of hyper-casual, possibly what people remember when they're so negative about the genre as a whole. It's an immense thing, absolutely huge, but its growth is falling. It's been falling since mid last year-ish. It's still huge, and it is still growing quite fast. But the rapid growth it had in its early days, in its infancy, it's just slowing down. And it's making people wonder, is it going to die? Is it going to transform? Is it going to become something different? And we're going to talk about that today. I think it's probably good to just broadly discuss why hyper-casual games are what they are, what defines them, why are they so addictive. And now the best place to start with that is what we've already spoken about, how it's categorized, arcade. Hyper-casual games come from that tradition of the physical arcade, somewhere you would go to play simple, highly addictive games with very straightforward core loops. You had to pay per play. It was a semi-social experience. You'd go there with friends, but it was out of the way. So even though these games probably had mass appeal, they were addictive, they weren't going to kick off because you had to leave your house. No one likes leaving their house. It's a lot of work.
Especially now.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're used to this. Hypercasual went right back to the arcade world. They took all of those mechanics and those core loops. They even brought in that essentially pay per play model. And it's proven to be a huge success. So first of all, let's lay out the core principles of what a hypercasual game are. So super simple gameplay, often just a gesture or a touch, a tap, something easily digestible. You can pick it up and just play straight away. They tend to be low fidelity graphics-wise, so simple, attractive, cartoony, colorful. There's always a sense of easy progression. Like you play it to feel good. You play it to fill time. You want that dopamine hit, so you want to win levels. The levels are short because they're fitting in a small space, but controls and colors and stuff like that change between levels sometimes. So it looks new, but it feels like something like home. There's often heavy interruptions, though, either from interstitials or banners or rewarded videos. And this is changing as the industry catches up to player-first advertising and monetization, but it's always going to be a difficult transition. The hyper-casual games tend to attract what we call accidental gamers a lot. And these are people who don't call themselves gamers. Like, would you call yourself a gamer, Sam? If that's your main, if you were to play hyper-casual alone, is that what you'd call yourself?
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of a gamer, right? If the definition of a gamer is playing games, then yes. But in people's mind, a gamer is, there's a stereotype that is attached to that, and it's not typically people playing casual games. In fact, I used to ask a lot of our investors and partners and advertisers, are you a gamer? And many people don't think they are. They say no. And then you look at their phone and there is a Sudoku, there's Candy Crush, there's a couple of other mini games or brain games. And technically, by the modern definition, they are a gamer. So it's really interesting to see how the definition of a gamer has changed, has expanded. And hyper-casual has been really the catalyst for that. They are the ones, when we say, gaming is becoming mainstream, predominantly it's because hyper-casual exists, and they build all the mechanics that you mentioned to appeal to non-gamers, people who are not willing to spend days understanding the game and trying to pass the first level. Most people do not have that resilience, and they just want something to feel good in between two breaks or even in the bathroom. So it's a very, very different. They play on very, very different motivations.
They really do. And to put some numbers to what you were saying about attracting a different kind of gamer, there are about 2 billion gamers in the world. That's a huge portion of the global population, first of all. But the hyper-casual market within that's about 660 million. So over a quarter of the overall worldwide gamers are hyper-casual. They're accidental. They are your mum or your dad or your brother or your uncle who you see now and then. They're all gamers, even though they don't think of themselves as gamers. It's absolutely remarkable. Obviously, we need to talk about monetization of them and what their place is in the market. It'd be good to look at the business model, like the unit, the unit calculations of that. Exactly. You want to run us through that, Sam?
Sure. So as we've said before, right, hyper-casual games, they appeal to people who are playing just to distract themselves, to kill time. The session times are generally pretty short. It's about 6 minutes, roughly. And the retention over time, although it starts pretty much on par with other games, it's very rare to see a hyper-casual games after 30 days that is still being played. So it's really something that you'd play for a day if you really like it, maybe a few days. But because this game is so simplistic, there's just not much to drive you back to it. There's not much of a sense of long-term progression. It's really short bursts of fun. And so because of that, because users only spend limited amount of time in the game, there's not much of an economy behind it. People are not engaged enough to want to take their wallet out and pay for upgrades and things like that. That generally happens when, you know, they can see a long-term future for the game, right? They invested in a new skin or a new weapon or something. If it's something that they're going to drop the next day, they're not going to invest. So hyper-casual developers are relying on advertising. 95% of revenue is advertising. And so their goal, because the lifetime, the session time is so short, their goal is to cram as many impressions per session, ad impressions per session as possible, as early as possible, so that they can cover the cost of acquisition of that user, which we'll talk about in a bit. Most of the acquisition is not organic, it's paid for. They need to cover that cost as fast as possible so that the user becomes profitable. And when the user is profitable, they don't really care what happens to it. Do they keep playing? Great, that's more ad revenue there. But if they don't, they've already made their money back on that user. And it's all about volume. That's the key for hyper-casual. This is why they have so many players. It's all about acquiring as many users as possible, bringing them through that network, and then making sure they're profitable. So there's basically two types of ads that hyper-casual publishers would use for now. One of them is rewarded ads. So these are the ads, or interstitial ads. So these are the ads that are like full screen on your phone, vertical generally, and it's about 15 to 30 seconds. And generally you cannot skip them. They are stacked between levels. So, you know, every time you finish a 20-second or 25-second level, you have to sit through another 25 seconds of seeing generally an ad for another game. And so these ads pay pretty well, about $10, $15 CPM, sometimes more, because they are unskippable. And so this is how other hyper-casual games are acquiring users, through those ads. And then on top of that, on many of these hyper-casual games, you also have the banners at the bottom, the small banners, which generally refresh very fast, every 5 to 10 seconds. You probably never notice them when you're playing. The click-through rate on those is probably like 0.1% or something, but it's a very common format, and advertisers are generally supporting them. So of course it really varies, right? How many ads are being served? Some publishers are more aggressive than others. A broad benchmark or estimation shows revenue about 0.1 to maybe 0.15, 0.17 dollars per session. And that's already with 15 interruptions, right? Every 20 seconds for 6 minutes. And then 50 refresh of that banner. So that's already a heavy interruption, heavy sessions. The average revenue per session is probably a lot lower than that. So now knowing that that's on the first day, right? You acquire all these users, and then on the next day, you probably have only 25% of the users that are coming back. 25% of that, it's $0.04 per session. So now you realize why they need a lot of sessions to make a lot of money. And also, they also need to acquire users at a very cheap cost, because if they're not making money, they're making their money back, then that user is not profitable. So it's really a very narrow margins on the unit economics, and that's what the success is, to be honest. It's they have mastered acquisition, they have mastered monetization, they know exactly how much a user is going to make, and they're able to scale that to literally billions of users.
It is very fascinating. It's this balance between the cost to acquire that user and how much you can make from them in the first day, essentially. And because they're staying for just one day, the actual cost of acquiring them becomes so important. Usually, so it's worth talking about user acquisition quickly, for sure.
Absolutely.
Because so if you've done a Facebook campaign, you know that the more targeted it is, the more it's going to cost to acquire any single user. The more niche genres, mid-core strategy, the more hardcore it gets in the gaming world, the more you're going to have to target to get the audience you want. Hyper-casual, on the other hand, are so untargeted, it's hilarious. They want to cast a wide net. They want to catch as many fish as possible. And to Facebook, for if that's your ad platform of choice, others are available. That means they don't want that much money from you. They're just you're telling them to just go to the first person they see and show them your game, and that's cheap. And Hypercasual can get away with that because they have these mass appeal concepts. They're colorful, they're nice, but that also wasn't enough. And that's why you start seeing ads that are completely irrelevant to the game that they're advertising. Gameplay that doesn't reflect the game, graphics that don't reflect the graphics sometimes. You can click through and get something completely different. And that is heavily criticized in the industry. And understandably so, because it's
very misleading. Yeah,
it's misleading. It's crazy.
But it really shows that the marketability of the game, the user acquisition and the way you monetize them and the way that you design your ads, that's actually where their resources are going, not into crafting interesting games. By the moment you get in the game and you've seen the first couple of ads, you're already a profitable user. They don't really need to build some exciting gameplay to leave you there. They've already made a positive transaction. So most of their work is in the back end, effectively trying to maximize the number of users and minimize the cost of user acquisition. Because if you look by casual game standards or strategy game or all those kind of game standards, the unit economics just don't work because the average cost per install is about $2 to $3. They will never make that money back with one hyper casual player. So they needed to find a way to really change the game in terms of acquiring users at a much cheaper cost, and precisely using the channels that you mentioned.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. The macro, they are, again, another differentiation between hypercasual and any other game genre. The business behind them is so different. They're not. They're investing in getting users, not building the game.
More marketing company, which is why I was saying, is it really a game? Are you really a gaming company, or you're generating marketing arbitrage on selling a user cheaper than you're buying it for? That's essentially what it is.
Absolutely. And it's also fascinating to me that the hypercasual world passes players back and forth, essentially. You advertise your game in either another one of your games or a competitor's game, because that's just the mobile market and how it is. So there is an element of passing money between the big players too. And that in itself is incredible. You don't imagine like Coca-Cola sending a competitor money and then that competitor sending you money in order to get that user back. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
You sort of get an image of why the hyper-casual market might be, plateauing a little bit. Yeah, like people are they're skeptical about these false ads. The novelty wears off a little bit. So we sort of need to ask where hyper-casual is going. What's going to happen next? How are they going to survive as an industry, as a business, if this declining growth continues? Because at the end of the day, and this is sort of the lead up to this entire next section of the podcast, they're not competing with other games or our PCs for our attention. They're not competing with consoles. They're not competing with any other gaming genre. They are competing with social media and any other brief distraction. As we spoke about before, people aren't playing these games in dedicated sessions, hour-long sessions before they go to bed. They're on the toilet. They're waiting for a bus. They are normal people filling little empty gaps in their lives. And how can you get more from that target audience? How can you change how you market to those target audience? One of those options is to completely broaden the audience even more, try and gather even more people. And the term that's sort of been going around for that, a term coined by home games, is ultra casual, even more casual than hyper casual.
Describe that for me. What does that look like?
It looks to an outsider, it looks like watching paint dry a little bit.
Right. That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah, it's more like a coloring book. It's like a satisfying experience, not so much a game. It's like It's like poking an empty field and watching a tree grow, and there's no other mechanics. That's just sort of it.
There's a lot of slicing games as well, because it's just, you know, satisfying to see how well you can slice it, but there's absolutely no skill involved at all.
Yeah, and I think that's the real power of ultra casual. Like, you don't need any skill. Like, you can lose a hyper casual game, you can fail a level. Ultra casual, there is no loss. There is only like, you feel good now. And there's a power to that. Like, there are people who want these games just to feel nice and fill that spare 5 minutes on the toilet and feel good. And that's important. Obviously, there's a marketing hurdle there. How do you market an ultra casual game differently to a hyper casual game? And that's sort of, I don't really have an answer for that. I think that's something. I think ultra casual games are being made. They do exist. And if this is the option the industry chooses to really invest in, we're going to see how they market these games differently, and it will be different to acquire more users. We just don't know yet.
Yeah. I think it's exactly as you said. It's just the next step. So it's even broader targeting, if any. Literally anyone is part of that target market. Potentially, the session times are probably going to be even shorter. Just something that maybe you want to try once. And so in a way, it's really just pushing the growth problem that hyper casual might have to the next stage, because that audience eventually is also going to be exhausted, right? I mean, we already have 700 million monthly players. There's only 2 billion people playing games, and I think 2.5 billion people with access to the internet, or maybe 3 billion. So we're already there. It's the same problem that Facebook has. Who doesn't have Facebook? Where can they find growth? So it's kind of normal that the growth rate is falling, because they are really approaching the ceiling of what their market can allow.
That's true. So, I mean, that leads us to the other option. If there are no other users to draw in with this ultra casual option, how can you generate more revenue? An answer there is by becoming essentially a user acquisition channel for more hardcore games, strategy, midcore, something like Clash of Clans or Game of War. How can you get the in-app purchase revenue power that those games have, and combine that with the ad revenue and mass appeal of hyper casual? The popular term for that right now is hybrid casual, which is, I believe, a term coined by Deconstructor of Fun, which is a fantastic blog around this subject. Hybrid casual is absolutely fascinating to me. On a business level, it's also fascinating. In essence, they make hyper casual games, so super simple mechanics, often swipe, tap, very engaging, very accessible, low fidelity graphics, colorful. But on top of that, there's this meta game. And that surprises you. Like, you come in for the colorful graphics and the simple gameplay, but then there are stats, and there's, party members and outfits and costumes, and you very slowly get suckered into playing a full-on mid-core game, and you don't even realize it. Archero is a great example. Archero is very popular right now. Very simple gameplay. You just move, you tap on the phone to move. You don't choose where you're shooting at. You don't choose anything. But then you just get sucked into this bigger world of mechanics. The roguelite element of it, which is inherently addictive, the equipment, the just broader, longer-term progression. And before you know it, you're a paying customer. You've spent a little bit of money to get that little boost, that little bit extra equipment, and then it snowballs, and suddenly the company is making a lot more money out of this single user than they ever thought they could in hyper casual. And that's huge. That's converting mass appeal to long-term retention, and that's a game changer in this industry, I think.
I think it's interesting because it's something we were mentioning on the previous podcast as well. As soon as you have made this purchase, you've crossed that line between being like a casual user, I don't really care about this game, to kind of being financially committed. Even if it's 49p or 79p and you bought something, you're going to want to use it in the future. And so that alone is probably a very big win state for them to really increase the retention. And I'm sure that you can see in the data that as soon as a user has spent something, no matter how small, they stay for a lot longer. And because they stay for a lot longer, you can then monetize using other methods, not just advertising, but also in-app purchase, which is it's a really interesting mechanics. I think one big reason why hypercasuals are really successful is also because of the volume of games that they produce. We haven't really talked about that. Traditional console games, they might build it for years. Hypercasual, it's literally a matter of weeks, and every week there are new games. And if they can't build the game in-house, they would partner with with developers and publish the game for them. So they're really trying to find as much content as possible. They don't want to sweat, is this game going to be popular or not? What should we build? They just put it out there, see what works. If it doesn't, they just kill it. So to be able to do that and produce so much content, that is why the games are so simple. This is why it's literally a game that coding-wise can probably be made in a couple of weeks or even less. Sometimes it's a matter of a weekend once you decide what to build. And so if the developers now decide to include more complex metagame in-app purchase, actually build an economy that works, that's a ton of work, trust me. This is really going to increase the time that it takes for them to release these games. So I think what we're going to see is it's going to start as hyper-casual. And then if the retention is good, if people keep playing it while being a very, very simple game, then they might release an update. They might handpick the hyper-casual games that work best and build meta game on top of it and eventually build it into an actual game. And I think, that's another thing that hyper-casual doesn't have. There's no real IP. There's no real attraction to the characters or anything like that, or to a storyline even. But I think if that is actually what the industry is going towards, we might see that hyper-casual actually give birth to casual games, and then potentially that might evolve into strategy and even maybe a AAA game that is just built on the premise of something that had been tested in a hyper-casual way. So it's going to be really interesting to see how far the developers can take it, and how much value they can extract from effectively testing different concepts at a very, very fast pace.
Yeah, it's essentially rapid prototyping
Pretty much.
The broad
with 700 million users.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You get a lot of data really quick.
Oh yeah, you really do. And there's a lot of motivation to do this. Like, we don't need to go into the profitability of mid-core or strategy games or anything like that. To give one example to just legitimize that, there was a story a couple of years ago about a Game of War player who he was caught embezzling money from his company. He stole like 7 million, and he ended up spending about 1 million of that on Game of War alone.
I did read that.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. So really, those two routes, either becoming much more simple or becoming much more complex and drawing in user acquisition but keeping them there, those are the two sort of options that the industry has. And there's no real way of knowing which it's going to choose. In my mind, hybrid casual seems more likely, because long-term retention, proven profitability, easier to make, and you can see that with idle games, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. Plus the potential to go into an IP like Angry Birds did. You could argue they took this sort of approach in the long term.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's just too lucrative and attractive for a company, I think, but it's going to require such big business changes. It's
and a lot more resources. I think a lot of indie developers are going to resort to the easiest way, which is going to be building ultra casual. In fact, the reason why my first studio was building hyper casual, which back in the day in 2014-15 was not actually a term. We did that because we were only 6 people. And so we didn't really have like the ability to do complex design. We didn't have the ability to build an economy or to do complex gameplay. So we thought, let's build mini games. And, it was really the growth of smartphones. And so it was not really a choice, but it was, we defaulted to that. And I think a lot of studios today are finding success in hyper casual because for the first time, they're not competing in budgets, in production budget at least. Then you need obviously the scale to publish. But as far as gameplay design, it remains pretty basic.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to see where it's going. I think honestly, the last note we can say for this conversation is keep watching the market, because it will change, and it will change soon. And I, for one, am excited.
Absolutely, and I think it also affects a lot of the big market dynamics, the micro changes. A lot of the acquisition and M&A that we've seen in the space is a lot of studios partnering with monetization solutions, who generally are very data driven and can really help with maximizing the revenue as well as user acquisition. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes, a lot of mergers in the market to cater for this new category.
Fascinating stuff. I think that's all we've got time for, but that was really interesting.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Thank you guys for listening, and catch you next week.